Thank you again. I hope you had a good coffee. It's hard to come back inside with the beautiful garden outside. So I'm now going to talk to you a little bit about our Internet Cognitive Behavioural Therapy program. And really, to us, this is really another wonderful example of how we translated our research into practice. So again, this is the work of the Parent Infant Research Institute. And this is an example where we did 6 years development research, and now we have something out available across Australia. So you remember this slide? I showed you about the programs that we've developed. And the one that I'm going to talk about now is our Mum Mood Booster program, an online program for perinatal depression and anxiety, which was based on our Getting Ahead of Postnatal Depression program, but once you transcribe something into the digital online space, it changes a lot. Now, why e-mental health programs? Well, we know 13% of women develop postnatal depression. We know, how serious the effects are, and we know that many women, despite being identified, even when they've had a screening, will still not seek or accept help. And we've looked at the barriers like stigma, fear, but sometimes it's just difficulty getting to the clinic, attending face-to-face sessions. And so we decided that we wanted to give women options. We wanted to have available for women not just face-to-face treatments, but also e-interventions, which might deal with some of the barriers because it could be perceived as anonymous, it's accessible to a lot of women, it's convenient, it's affordable. You can do it in the middle of the night when your baby is asleep, if you can't sleep for whatever reason. And we know from the general literature that there are some very successful e-interventions out there on depression, anxiety, panic disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder. But we hadn't yet seen a cognitive behavioural therapy program for perinatal depression. So we set about developing one. We also wanted to ask the question, is coaching helpful for e-health interventions? Do we need to support women when they do an internet program with a coach, not a therapist, but a coach, to engage and to motivate? And we know from the literature that some form of contact for people doing online programs is important to improve the effect sizes and adherence. So we set about with the idea that we would start off by providing some supportive coaching. So we developed 2 innovative programs, Mum Mood Booster for postnatal depression, and later Mum to Be Mood Booster for depression in pregnancy. Now, this program is available on a desktop. It was initially developed for computers. We've worked to make it more responsive on smartphones. And I think this is going to work. If you watch the screen here, it'll show you how women go to this site. Oh, hang on. This is supposed to move, but I always seem to press it wrong. Mattel, I might need your help. You're going to do it?
You've arrived at session 1, the first of the 6-session Mum Mood Booster program. We know that many mothers with new babies can have difficulty finding the time to use the web program, as well as making changes to your everyday routine. It can be hard to put yourself first, but by doing so, you will be in the best position to manage all the demands of motherhood. One last point before you get started. Please take your time, about a week, to work through each of the 6 sessions. There really isn't any benefit in going any faster. Your goal is to thoroughly explore each session. Thanks for listening, and welcome again to your Mum Mood Booster program.
So when a woman logs into the program, she can choose to listen to an introduction welcome video, and that was a bit of it where the host, the psychologist, says, welcome, you've taken the first important step in your recovery. And so there are a number of features that try to personalise the program. So these treatments have been evaluated through an international collaboration which spanned over 10 years. So we initially got NIH funding, and we worked with an American group who were behavioural change experts, and we were the perinatal depression experts. And we tried to make this program as close as possible to face-to-face CBT. And so that was our idea, that the experience of the user is that it is very personal, very individually tailored, works on her problems as you would. And we worked with Oregon Research Institute in the US and our staff at Peri. And it was a wonderful collaboration, I must say. And so in America, it's called Mom Mood Booster, and in Australia, it's Mum Mood Booster, because we pronounce mum differently. So it's the only P&D program for women diagnosed with depression. We tailored it for women with a depression diagnosis, and we have found it to be effective for both major and minor depression. Our research results have been really quite gratifying. So women who joined our randomised trial had to meet diagnostic criteria, and 80% of women were no longer depressed at the end of the internet treatment. We had a 95% completion rate, and compared to treatment as usual, 4 times as effective as standard care. We've now gone on to compare it to face-to-face treatment in a randomised trial, and we're about to publish our results, and it's also just as effective. So this is what it looks like behind the scenes. So a woman comes into the program and is asked to rate her mood, and she's taught how to use the tools on the program, like how to track her activities, and then she's invited to join session 1. And you will see that there are 6 sessions here, just like you would have in a CBT program, and the woman works her way through the program. She can only do 1 session a week. And then there's also a partner support website. So it's a website that she can invite her partner to come to, which is a mixture of helping him or her understand what the symptoms are, but also it's to survival tips for partners. And then there's personalised tools, there's tracking, choosing pleasant activities, and there's a lot of library articles. So the women can go to a library article anytime. It could be for stress management, for thinking about other things. That's not the therapy sessions. The therapy sessions are just like you would if you see a psychologist once a week. So this is what it looks like. You saw our host introducing the program, and if you don't want to listen to the host, then the writing says the same thing. We always provide a very close scrutiny of the level of depression, especially for the level of risk, because we're dealing with women who might at any time have depression that escalates, and so we measure depression 3 times with the PHQ-9 during treatment, and if the woman is escalating, she will get a risk alert message telling her, like, it seems you're having a difficult time, this program mightn't be enough for you, go and see your health professional. So it's just saying that those who are at high risk will be contacted. There's telephone coaching offered, and what it is 20 minutes a week, and it's a low-intensity type worker who may not be a qualified psychologist, could be a student, could be a nurse, who checks in how we have a script for telephone coaches. How are you going the program? Did you have any problem with doing any of the activities, understanding the program? So it's not to really expand on my problem is this or this, but it's whether she's been able to do the session and how that's happened. We currently had a lovely student from Italy, Marta, you can wave, who came to Australia to analyse some of our coach data, to have a look at what the coaches were actually doing as opposed to what we told them to do. So women who register high will get coach support. So the library articles, why did we have library articles? Well, some women get impatient when you have an online program and you have the first session and you want to go on to the second session. It sort of makes them impatient, but also in a 6-week program you can't cover everything. So we tried to develop what we thought might be the most relevant things, such as communication skills, getting support, and so on, and we find that they are used. To give you an idea about how we teach women to track their mood and pleasant activities, it's very simple. As you can see, again, sorry about that. She sets a date and she says what her mood is. Worst day, best day. And then later on, after she's learned to track her mood, she learns to track what she's done that might be a pleasant activity. So we do that in cognitive behavioural therapy all the time. We introduce pleasant activities. But what's nice about having the opportunity to have a digital platform is we can give women feedback about how they've gone. So they can record their mood and pleasant activities with themselves and their baby, but then we can give them a graph. And so each woman has a workbook and she can look and say, my mood has been the same every day. I did a few more pleasant activities, but it didn't really seem to work. Or she might find that here is her mood, it got better, but it was while she was also doing more pleasant activities. So it helps someone know, well, you know, having a bath, which helps me and my mood, whereas, you know, going, you know, for a chat is not so helpful. So it gives a woman feedback, visual feedback. I've been able to do something about my mood. The other thing that we use, and which we found when we were developing the program, people understand very much when you're depressed, and that's a depressive spiral, because obviously we know that something can happen and you can easily start falling down to feeling bad by a few steps. Something happens, you start thinking something negative, then you start feeling worse, then you think you're doing something wrong, then you think you're a failure, and before you know, you're right at the bottom. So the aim of the program is to help women identify their triggers and how they're feeling and their thoughts at every point of the spiral. And in the program itself, it describes it in words to make it easier. So, it's in English, but it's a voice describing what happens at each step.
A key point in this program involves the way that your mood can become worse through a series of what feel like automatic reactions in a downward mood spiral. Typically, you start out experiencing a difficult situation. Then you have a negative thought that may be about yourself, the world, or your future, which makes you feel bad. You may feel depressed, anxious, frustrated, or any other unwanted feeling, which then affects what you say or do. This can make the original situation even worse, which makes you feel even worse.
So I don't know what you think, but we get a lot of feedback that is a very clear way of understanding why sometimes you just feel worse and worse because of what you think and what you do, which of course is cognitive behavioural therapy. So, as I mentioned, we had a number of phases of development, and particularly in the initial phases, we were just trying to understand, whether women would stay engaged in the program. And certainly in a research trial, we found engagement was very high, and that women, once they started the program, continued the program. And keep that in mind, that's in a research trial. And they liked the phone coaching, and what we've just nearly published, the trial that we just finished analysing the results about a week ago, was a new trial where we looked at face-to-face cognitive behavioural therapy compared to the Mum Mood Booster internet treatment. And we had 116 women with a DSM diagnosis of depression, and we randomised them both to face-to-face treatment and also treatment as usual. So our treatment as usual group is sending them back to their GP with a letter saying this woman is depressed. But actually, the reason it works as a control group is we know a lot of women will not go and continue on with help. So we used a number of measures, and this is really the highlight finding, that the rate of remission at 21 weeks were very similar in the face-to-face group and the Mum Mood Booster, in the Mum Mood Booster online treatment. So it was very similar results. And what was sort of interesting was that that's in terms of diagnosis. In terms of symptoms, again, it was similar, if not a little bit better. And you might say, why better? One of the things that we found is, I don't know what it's like in the Italian system, but usually there's a gap between, okay, you just scored as depressed, you need to get referred to someone, you need to make an appointment, there's, a wait list. So the lag of starting the internet treatment was faster than the lag of getting to see the psychologist. And all the psychologists were actually using our Getting Ahead of Postnatal Depression program, so they were using the manualised program. But there was a lag, so I think that could be one of the reasons why it was a bit better, or it just might have been a little bit better. But, what we are finding is that we can have confidence that it is a good option for women. It's not the only option, but it's a good option for women. And that shows the depressive episode of remission at follow-up. I don't think you really need to see all that. We also found it to be, because anxiety is such a problem, we're always curious how anxiety performs in a depression program, but we certainly did find improvement in anxiety, as you can see, which is very gratifying. I mean, the program is aimed to tackle both. So after we did our efficacy and compared to standard care, we've gone on to do multiple trials, which I won't go through in great detail, but we certainly have continued to monitor the impact in many different ways. What we find is that the women who are using the program are the sorts of women in terms of their characteristics you might expect to find. With an average Edinburgh score of around 16, and with a majority, 95%, having a major depression. So it is pretty interesting that it works for those with a diagnosed condition, and I think that that's what makes this program different than some of the other programs that are more psychoeducation. I'll just skip that, but if you look at this trajectory, it seems to be, if you have a look, the blue's Mum Mood Booster, it's a steady improvement in depressive symptoms across time compared to green, which is the treatment as usual group. And again, with this is just another way of showing it, that Mum Mood Booster after 12 weeks just does better than treatment as usual. Anxiety does better, not quite as, and stress, we also measured stress on the DAS, does better. Engagement was terrific. The thermometer's high. They liked the sessions, they liked the library articles, they liked, we had a web forum, and they liked the partner website. They were pretty satisfied with it, and they liked the coach calls. So we felt pretty comfortable that Mum Mood Booster was effective and could be used for women with severe diagnosed depression. And so we thought, well, what do we do now? We have this good program. How do we get it out there? I mean, like, it's sitting on our shelf in the office. And this is the RCT we just completed. So we thought, okay, let's try to look around for what we could do. And again, we were very keen to take our programs out into the real world, because also it might be that it's different. When you take it out into the real world, it's different than in a research project, which sometimes does not always give you the same view as in the real world. And we were really, really lucky. We got the government to actually decide that this was something that all Australian women should use. And we were successful in competing for a tender for perinatal depression. And we created a website called mumspace.com.au. And we were able to take it out onto a new Australian website, so that now all Australian women can actually go to Mumspace. It's free, and it's available for women and for professionals to refer their women to. Now, I'll give you more details, because it has more than Mum Mood Booster on this website. What's interesting is that we still, you're professionals, and there still is a task to be done to work with health professionals like yourselves of, could this be useful in your practice? Could you be using this as an adjunctive tool to what you do because of the pressure on time, the pressure on frequency of session and access, rather than it being either you go and see a professional or whatever? Could the therapist be, in a sense, an enhanced coach where you can deal maybe with other issues that are not the depression and anxiety, like there might be a couple relationship issue or whatever, so that you can use your time in other way while your patient, woman, client uses it? So I'll tell you a little bit about Mumspace. So Mumspace was developed by ourselves with a group, and we invited a group of others, and we formed a consortium. So we called ourselves the Perinatal Depression E-Consortium, and we've brought in other groups, and they're fantastic. They're great partners. And this is our logo. And we're funded by the Department of Health in Australia. So in addition to Mum Mood Booster program that I showed you, Mumspace has other evidence-based tools. Do you remember the model I showed you? So we've tried to provide something at all levels. So I've been talking about depression and anxiety diagnosis, and we find that it's also good for minor depression, but here's our Mum Mood Booster program. So, for example, this can be used for depression diagnosis. But what about What about those women who have mild symptoms? They wouldn't really think of themselves as depressed. They sometimes have a bit of a down day. They're not coping very well. What could we be providing them? And part of the government money was to develop an app to try and help women with problem solving, with positive thinking, with some tips for the day, to try to help those who are struggling a little bit. And we called it Mind Mum. At the same time, if you remember the model, all parents can do with some help with sleep, feeding, couple communication, and the partners had developed some very good tools called What We're Thinking and Baby Steps. So all this is available on the Mumspace website. And so we've been live, and you can, for now a year and a half, and you can see the number of women, 40,000 women, have gone to the website since we started in beginning in 2018. So that is a lot of women who've gone there. Now, not all of them have used all the tools, but it has been a lot of interest they've been able to see. And certainly quite a few have registered to Mum Mood Booster, and I'll come back to that and show you how the women perform in the real world. I'll just tell you a little bit about the Mind Mum app, which is, as you remember, for those women who just might be under stress, mightn't have a mental health disorder. And this is what it looks like. We said helping you with life's up and downs. You know, it's hard to find the language to convey, but we're continually developing it and changing it. So that's what it looks like. It's a smartphone, and it's got buttons about ideas of if you're having a bad day, what might you do? You can rate your mood on it, how you're feeling, ideas for feeling better, meditation, calm. You can log things, and you can do some problem solving. So it's quite interesting. We're still really coming to understand about who it's useful for and how it's useful. One of the things we found that women really like is we have tips for the day, which are really positive affirmations, you know, just do one nice thing today, and they just pop up on the screen. And women really like those tips. The other tools, What We Were Thinking and Baby Steps, are also very popular. So I don't know how to translate in Italian, but What We Were Thinking is it's a really good name. Like, you have a baby, what were we thinking? You know, it's sort of like the difficulties that you didn't anticipate when you decided to have a baby. That has a blog as well as an app. And Baby Steps also has some couple things. That's what it looks like, Baby Steps. And so remember, this is our step care approach. So we have on Mumspace, we have something right here, Baby Steps, What We're Thinking. We have Mind Mum, we have Mum Mood Booster, we have Mum to Be. I haven't talked about that, but we developed a pregnancy version too. And in the real world, we have decided to, well, partly because of funding, we have a version that is not with a coach as well, that just has SMS support messages. And currently, women over 15 on the Edinburgh are offered coaching, but they don't all take it up, but they all get the SMS supportive version. So that's what Mumspace looks like, and these are the tabs. But we always have also risk in our mind, so we've partnered with a self-help group that is able to have a helpline, and so if a woman feels that she needs urgent help, there's a helpline. So, does our depression treatment work in the real world? I don't know what you think, but we were very curious to find out. So, first of all, about 2,000 women so far have tried Mum Mood Booster, which is interesting. You can see how one of our tasks is how to promote this in the community, and we use a lot of social media because we're still working with professional groups to try to work out how they might use it. So we find in the real world that the women who go to it look just like our clinical trial people. They're 32 years old and they have an Edinburgh of about 15. Really interesting. And this is what they tell us. They like the content of the sessions. You know, that's a feedback on a profile of what they like. They particularly like the SMS messages. They like the library articles. And what we're finding, though, which is really interesting, is that they don't necessarily do all the sessions, and yet, when we're tracking the PHQ-9, we're finding that they're improving. So we're still trying to understand what might help us have women use more sessions. We certainly find that those women who take up phone coaching use more sessions. That's sort of interesting. But we're not finding the same exactly result as in our trials, and yet their depression is improving. So it might be for some women they come and they take what they want, and that's enough. So what are we doing now? Well, we're trying to work with health professionals, GPs particularly, to incorporate Mum Mood Booster in their practice. We're trying to develop Mind Mum further. We're continuing to roll it out free, and now we want to develop, and apart from our pregnancy version, we want to develop a male version. So I'll talk about that in a moment, but before that, the other new thing that we're doing in the e-mental health space is trying to help nurses know what to do after screening, and it might be refer them on to the e-treatment, but it might be refer them on to a psychologist, a GP, a lactation nurse, whatever is needed. So what we've done is we've got a large amount of funding to a cluster randomised trial of 600 women, and what we want to do is to try to address the poor treatment uptake of women who are already screened. So we're going to involve, by the end of the trial, 1,650 women, and half are going to use, the nurse is going to have help, electronic help, to refer a woman appropriately, and half will just use the usual practice. And the overall aim of the project is to establish a way of moving from screening to taking treatments up. As we know, many nurses don't have mental health experience, and so we were working with nurses to try to improve their ability to refer on. And so we've developed something called Pyramid, and it's a on-screen prompt for when you have a screening result, and I'll show you in a moment, what do you do next? And as far as we know, there are no studies, except for one in Canada, that is looking at something similar. So here's our research trial. We're going to compare this to this, and what we want to do is to increase treatment uptake for those women who are depressed. So this is how we start. In Australia, we now have iCope, which is a bit similar to what was talked about this morning in the regional group. We have the Edinburgh on a screen. You can see where you can do the Hooley question, the Edinburgh, and the psychosocial questions on an iPad. The mother, while she's waiting for the nurse, can fill it out. It asks, of course, the usual questions that you expect to see. Here are the Huli questions. And the Huli questions, we're including it because we want to do more research on the relationship between the Edinburgh and the Huli. The Huli is sort of interesting in that it can be sometimes thought as the first step before screening, because if you score no on the Huli, it's very likely that you aren't depressed. If you score yes, there'll be a lot of false positives, but it's a very quick way of having the no's out of the way. So it can be used as a two-step. But the main function is to get an Edinburgh score, so this is with paper and pencil, just like here in the regions. It's much nicer when you do it electronically. So that's the Edinburgh, and so with our study, we want to now say, okay, how does the nurse use those scores and develop a management plan? So we know the problem, it's wide, only a minority, so the woman fills out the Edinburgh in the clinic, and then the nurse on her computer will have a screen that'll help her work out what to do next. And this is what it looks like. Straight away, she doesn't have to add up, she gets the scores. She has to enter just very briefly what she knows about the woman. For example, this mother lost her baby 6 weeks ago, or whatever else is important, but not very much, or this mother has a history of depression. This is to help her develop a management plan, but also acts as a referral form, so she can then email it or print it out to give to a referring person. Then we teach the nurse to say, well, okay, look, you got those scores, but if you had a high score on the suicidal score, there'll be other assessments needed. So we try and make it easy for the woman, for the nurse. Sorry. We say, sorry, it's very hard turning around and seeing the big screen where to point. So we say, okay, why don't you tick what you might need to do next? Do you need an anxiety assessment? Do you need to assess the mother-infant relationship? So what we're trying to do is, because nurses are so busy, in a very short time that they can very quickly identify what might be needed to make a good referral. And then to create a management plan. Okay, so I know that these things are needed. What else might I do next? Well, I might refer her on to one of these people, or I need to think about this as well. But once she's filled out this very simple form, there's, in a sense, a beginning of a management plan that she can do, because what we're finding is that nurses are screening and they don't always translate to a management plan. And this is a research trying to see if we can help the nurse just very quickly tick, 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 she needs this, she needs that, she doesn't need that, and to then refer it on. It's quite interesting working with the nurses. They're really great people to work with, and try to work out how we can work together to make this happen. So in the end, it'll be a management plan that covers all these things. The GP, for example, will get that form. Okay. So I'm going to talk for about another 10 minutes, and then we're going to break for questions. So this is the last little bit that I'm going to talk about. So Gina, I'll talk for 10 minutes, and we'll have 20 minutes for questions. So I'm jumping a little bit from things because I think I'm more interested to hear what you want to hear about. So what we really want to do next is we want to find out how we can best help fathers. Now, we know that there's less awareness in the community, certainly in Australia, about the role changes that challenge men as they become fathers. And we also know that depression and anxiety affects new fathers. So, I mean, I think that that cartoon is a good depiction of what we find, you know, it can be. You have a wife who's depressed, come home, here's the baby, worried about money, not sure what to do, can't sleep, don't know. It's hard. We also have here, you know, how sometimes there's some misunderstanding, particularly sexually. I'll show her how much I love her. How can he be so selfish when I've had such a long day and all I want to do is sleep? So we certainly know that in our Getting Ahead of Postnatal Depression program, we encourage couples to talk about, you know, sexuality that's changed, you know, what might be different, and for it not to be a taboo topic. We know that waking up in the middle of the night is not that easy, so, you know, like it's not an easy thing to negotiate. And we know that men may experience distress, not necessarily depression and anxiety always, at the same rate as women, but it may be irritability, it may be evidenced in other ways, there may be more alcohol use. And we know that for those men that do become depressed, that can also have an impact on the child. So it's just not just the maternal impact on the child development, we also, and I'm talking about men and fathers, but certainly we are developing a lot of our materials to take into account that we have all sorts of family configurations now in same-sex couples and different ethnic groups, but we are initially developing a father package. So we know that paternal depression is associated with hyperactivity in boys, emotional problems in girls, and may have a range of other symptoms than depression. And yet even fewer men seek help than women. And we know, and I think I once had a conversation with some of your service people here, that they're less likely to seek help and engage in treatment in Italy as well. So I'd be interested to hear from you. And we're quite interested in trying to gear our program not just to depression, but to things like anger, irritability, alcohol use, and to make sure that our program is male-specific. So we will use our Mum Mood Booster program as the basis, but we are going to have many men involved to help shape it and change it. And we think that e-mental health is a way to engage men, that it's more likely if there's a short program on your smartphone, you might go to it rather than go to a clinic and see a therapist. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to first have focus groups with new fathers to identify what features of Mum Mood Booster are helpful, what is not. We are going to retain some of the core treatment features because, you know, you do need to treat depression, and that's what we're focusing on. So we're hoping to start the study at the end of the year, and instead of calling it Mum Mood Booster, which the women chose, we think it's going to be called Man versus Mood. It's quite a different way of thinking about how you tackle mood. And it'll be interesting to hear a little bit from you about what you think makes it easier or harder for fathers to attend and engage in postnatal care and talking when depression has either affected them or their partners. And if fathers are more involved, we're hoping this can mean more support and advocacy for mothers as well, better bonding with infants and better mental health for fathers themselves. So I'm just going to finish up with one of our poems that is in our book because it is the prelude to what started all our work, is women telling us things like, no one told me it was going to be like this. No one said it would be so hard. Black mornings, grey days, no appetite, and so much sleep I miss. It's just so powerful when you talk to women of how dark and bleak the experience when you've just had a baby and the societal myth is you should be happy, but it's really not. And so why we're all here today, and I'm sure why you're here, is we want to help women to realise it isn't always going to be like this. So together, it's wonderful to see such a turnout of people interested in perinatal mental health. I look forward to hearing about more developments in Italy and the work that's going to happen to help young families. So that's the end of the talk, and I believe there's a discussion time now if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, there's lunch waiting not far away. Thank you.